Hello, good morning. This is Teresa Septien, Managing Director for Latin America, ready to broadcast this second part webinar, Knowing the Ropes When Traveling, Supporting the Female Traveler. Many of you might be attended the last week's seminar provided by Lisa. The idea of this session today will be to give a brief overview of some of the main risks female travelers are facing right now, and then really focus on what to do, on how to respond as an individual or as a corporation if those risks really materialize. So besides doing that, we will also give you some advice on what components need to be included in a risk management program related to female travelers as a corporation. And of course, also provide you with some basic guidelines of how to support victims while traveling and how this all process really ends until this traveler is back home. It is very important to know that today female travel statistics and trends are very relevant. Female travelers are making decisions on a world of travel economy. We have more women traveling to different locations. Intel business travel will increase probably by 4 to 9% per year in the near future. Business expanding to new markets, seek cheaper labor, otherwise develop international presence. And this is something we are looking with multinational corporations. Of course, it's also important to mention that travel comes with inherent risk. 1 out of 12, that is an 8% of travelers, will be seeking care during those business travels. We see some trends regarding female traveling alone, since that has become a commonplace, with more than half, that's 59%, of agents, they have recorded these business travelers to be between the ages of 39 to 45 years. We have a lot of widows, for example, or friends traveling to different destinations. But it's very important to know that global threats involving several risks like terrorism, extreme weather, organized crime have had a dramatic shift and impact on corporate travel risk and landscape. And we need to understand where those threats and risks can be materialized for planning these business travels. But we also need to understand the real risk our travelers are facing right now. If you look at this terror threat map and the hotspots, we can see that right now Europe represents high risk regarding terrorism. Attacks fall in Western countries, for example, in 2015, but it was one of the most lethal years for terrorist violence in Europe in nearly a decade. Western countries were least affected by terrorist violence and recorded only 1% of all terrorist attacks worldwide. Some of the potential emergencies and crises when traveling, that must be taken into consideration are listed in this graph. It comes from natural disasters, terrorism, kidnap for ransom, extortion, criminal violence, assaults, hijacking while traveling in highways, and wrongful detention for political threats. Sometimes in our corporate management, risk management plans, we only consider like natural disasters or potentially some criminal violence. But we need to take into consideration the political scenarios of the countries where we will be traveling. This graph also shows how terrorism has been increasing in number of events per year. And as I mentioned before, 2015 was one of the years where we were highly impacted by these events. On the graph to your right, the countries with the most terrorist attacks, you can see several countries that there are in Africa, for example, in Asia, in the Middle East. But nonetheless, we have also several trends in high risk in travel in countries where we normally travel. And this particular slide, I think it's important, these high-level themes, because before we probably saw more bombings, but right now the trend that we are looking at is really armed attacks of a couple of individuals going into certain places and taking down even tourists. The tourist sector was hit hard by attacks in hotels, resorts, even airports, as we saw last year. The number of casualties has been increasing, and attacks and tourism has been also in the rise. Terrorism is not only targeting governments or militaries. The business community has been also targeted with a 9% according to several studies. Another threat to consider, of course, are natural disasters. Natural disasters that include hurricanes, earthquakes. Last year, for example, it was called the year of the earthquakes. We have several earthquakes that impacted even touristic areas like Italy and some business areas like Taiwan. So even if these are unpredictable scenarios, we need to be prepared to assist our female travelers while they are in this high-risk destination for natural disasters. Regarding to kidnappings, it is sometimes told that kidnappings are normally performed against nationals in their hometowns or countries. But as you can see, also travelers have been victims of kidnappings throughout 2016. We have several cases from Australian nationals, Italians, Europeans, Canadians, some of them in high-risk industries like the mining or the energy industry. Disease is something that we also need to take into consideration. Last year with the Olympics, there was a Zika virus alert, especially for female travelers, that might be pregnant. This virus could be affecting their babies. So it's also important as the travel manager, security director, to be aware that the female travelers must be aware of potential diseases during their business travels. So one of the key components that we want to stress out during this webinar is that we need to know the country, its culture, its traditions, and of course, the inherited risk when traveling to them. And this can be done really by having professional profiles on those countries and sharing that information to the female travelers. Here we have some examples of certain countries where females can be at risk. For example, in Italy, sexual assaults on females are frequent. In Brazil, the increase in rape has been constant in the last years. If you travel to Istanbul, the attitude towards women is completely different from what they are used to in Western countries. Domestic violence is very high in countries like Thailand, and this could be also impacting female travelers if they are going not necessarily to hotels and resorts, but visiting relatives or families or friends in these far destinations. In Mexico, there are many tourists traveling widely throughout the country. Mexico is a country that has several states that can be, well, with high risk levels based on organized crime. But regardless if you're traveling like to these nice resorts, these resorts can also be targeted by organized crime. We have recently an example in the Riviera Maya, in Playa del Carmen, where there was a Canadian festival, DJ festival, and suddenly in the last day a group of the organized crime of the Zetas went into that location and started shooting everybody. So we will stress out the importance of situational awareness, and even if you're traveling to these places, you need to be aware that there might be some risk. We also, for example, have to be aware that there are some countries like Bogota where public transportation is extremely dangerous for women. Here we have a list, for example, of all the different unsafe transport systems for women on a global basis. And if you look at it, we have some Latin American countries like Colombia, but we have Mexico, Peru, but on the 16th place we have New York, and Paris can be also challenging for female travelers. All this information needs to be included in the briefing or intel that is presented to the travelers before they go to these destinations, and make, of course, proper arrangements to have, in these cases, secure transportations for them at these locations. I will present some examples of attacks specific to female travelers. Linda Batcher, she was visiting her son, and she was in one of the most touristic places in Jordan when suddenly there was a terrorist attack, and they were really after police and citizens, but she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and unfortunately she was killed in that attack. Also, we have had reports of several female travelers that have been targeted at their hotels. One of these examples was a crew member that arrived into a hotel in Milan, and they were discussing their night plans at the lobby of the hotel. some of the criminals are looking into this information. They can be in restaurants or at these hotels, and what happened next is that with that sensitive information that he was able to gather, he went to the stewardess room, knocked, and of course went into her room and assaulted her. So it's very critical for female travelers to be able to control sensitive information and how and where you are sharing it. Another example is the bombing in the Orlando Pulse nightclub attack. Here also we have a situation where you might be at ease because you think you're in the US in a highly touristic destination, and suddenly you have this kind of lone wolf shooting out in the disco. This was one of the victims. So it was a grandmother. She was dancing with her son at that time, and when the attacker arrived, she put herself in front to avoid her kid to be murdered. So she's considered right now like a hero, but she was one of those victims. So as a resume of all these, all the threats and risks are evolving and are changing, and you can't really feel safe right now in some locations, since these trends that you have seen continue to evolve, and now everybody can really be a victim, but you need to be prepared in order to lower the probabilities of that happening. Some of the best practices while traveling and that we consider that security directors and travel risk managers should be enforcing is providing this best advice. The traveler must be aware, be low-key, be unpredictable, and maintain always good communications. So if you have all that previous information regarding the country that you will be visiting, you do the advanced planning for secure transportation, and you know the places that you will be visiting. The second part will be really the attitude as traveler to be a hard target for criminals in the countries that you will be visiting. So these four are probably the most important advice that a female traveler can follow. Having this situational awareness can help you, of course, in many ways during an act of terror and an attack, on an emergency or a crisis. So if you have few seconds when one of these attacks is about to happen to detect it, and if you can do that because you have that high level of situational awareness, probably you can move away from that danger and have a higher probability of not becoming a victim. If you, when you arrive to a place, and you can be looking into the exits and the routes to get out of those places, but before anything happens, and sometimes we even advise for you to be near those places, your probabilities of surviving to attack will, of course, also increase. And if you can't exit, you need to be able to have a plan in order to cover yourself. If you can identify those potential threats, you can prevent sometimes for these attacks to materialize, or at least you can protect yourself. Specific tips for female travelers: always use your common sense. We sometimes say that common sense is the least common of the senses, but this insecurity, we said that it is very, very important to listen to your gut, to use that common sense, to not do anything that you wouldn't do home. Of course, do not drink too much, do not go out at night, try to don't be alone while you're traveling or when you are going to certain places to have fun after you finish your business. Of course, do not go to hotels with strangers, and be aware as well of all the scams that are out there, and they are targeting travelers. A woman, as we said, can be her best asset when traveling. She needs to use all this common sense, this information to get out of trouble. Something, and this is related to very much to my millennials, we have been informed that several criminals are now targeting victims through social media. So if you're fond of sharing all your activities in real time, be careful, because sometimes this is something that criminals are looking for, so you can easily become targets. Some of these applications have GPS capabilities, and they will advise these criminals where to locate you. So some of the best practices regarding social media is really don't share anything until you have left, for example, that hotel or that area. Share it after the fact, so you don't really give real-time info that can be used by criminals. For female travelers on business, it's very important to follow this advice. It's very, the business culture in several countries is different from the one in the West or Europe. You need to be acquainted with that destination customs, business protocols, and culture regarding women. In some of those countries, women are not allowed to sit down in the same table as men. And you need to understand that women travelers and business women are perceived in a different way in different countries. Something that we also like to stress out is to dress appropriately. Local women in Arab countries, for example, are not allowed to show their faces or their heads. So if you're traveling there, you need to be aware of what kind of attires you will be using. And the way, of course, in which you will be treating men or interacting with businessmen in those countries. And we will come to the section where we will talk about the reaction to an emergency from two different perspectives. As a traveler, and then how to react to those incidents as a corporation that needs to support a business traveler. During an incident or emergency or event, our key focus or objective would be survival. Regardless if it's a massive natural disaster, or it's a kidnap crisis, or even an assault, the business traveler, the female traveler, must have in mind that in case all the preventive measures fail, the idea is to have the correct reaction to those incidents. And that objective will be surviving the situation. It's very important also to remember that sometimes when we face these emergencies or crises, we are not always with the right mindset, and we can be paralyzed and do not react in a correct manner. And also remember, regardless of who is the perpetrator, when you are at that moment when the crisis or the emergency is striking, you will be at a high risk situation. There are 4 basic actions that you can take in any kind of emergency or crisis as a potential victim. Of course, the first one is related to the situational awareness, is being alert, so you can look out and find out what's going on, what's happening in the place where you are at that moment. If you hear some shootings, for example, or an earthquake is starting, that's the moment when you need to take immediate action. If you are in a situation where you have an external danger, the following reaction would be like to lock you down in a safe place. The third one, if you need to decide if it's a moment to evacuate the location, and the fourth is to look for shelter. The course of action would need to follow these 3 basic steps. We can't always predict when an attack is about to happen. There might be no indications in your immediate surroundings to alert yourself to the fact that something is going down. You may be unaware until a few seconds or moments before a bomb goes off or a gun gets fired. If you find yourself suddenly in the midst of an act of terrorism, for example, your action should be one of the following: escape, get as far away from the threat as possible. Keeping the greatest distance from the threat is key to surviving. This is where your early observant behaviors come in handy, because you already know the escape routes. If you are in charge of vulnerable individuals like children, your first choice of action should be to get them to safety if at all possible. Take cover. If you can get away, get behind something solid and wait for your opportunity to either escape or fight back. This is something else you may have observed when doing your earlier reconnaissance. And the third option, that of course it's not one that we actively recommend, but it can be the last option to survive, is take out the threats. In this case, you need to assess who is the criminal or who's acting against you, and if you really have a chance to be taking him down, or act as a team or cooperate with potential victims that are with you to try to take the threat down. The most important thing to consider is not necessarily which action you will take, but really do not freeze. To have the mindset and use your senses and your preparedness to avoid being incapacitated by just staying there in shock. Remember that your brain is a weapon too, and your brain will be allowing you to react in a proper manner if you have previously review what you will be doing in this kind of threatening situations. These are some basic suggestions that what you will need to do if you find yourself in a crime scene. If a crime is happening near you at that moment, one of the first things, as we have mentioned before, is you need to look for your own safety, to get away of that area if possible, and if the offender is there, please act in a calm manner if possible. Normally, criminals do not like to feel that they are threatened. We recommend our travelers to do not look them in the eye, for example, to try to keep that moment as short as possible, to listen to what they are requesting. If they want your watch, they want your phone, they want your purse, give it away, and try to make that moment as short as possible. Keep alert and focus on your safety first. While traveling, you need to know what are the emergency numbers for the country that you are visiting. But do that before you have to face one of these situations. A little more of the same if you are a victim of an assault while walking. You need to listen, comply, and keep short that moment. Give everything away. Remember, you can recover anything except your life. So it's important to have that in mind, regardless of what you have been asked to give to those criminals. It's important for you to give it away. While driving, the vehicle can be your best tool when it's moving, but it can be a deadly weapon if you are in it and you are parked. Criminals normally target people that are alone in stopped vehicles. So if it's possible, keep your car moving. Normally attacks happen when you are driving. Criminals do not like to go, for example, into your office, into your corporate environment, because they have several protective barriers that they need to overtake before they get to you. So that's why it's very frequent to have attacks on the vehicle. So if you're in this situation as well and you couldn't prevent moving or detect these criminals, then you should comply. And if they want your car or you want their wallet, please provide those, give it away. Try to avoid the criminals to get into your car and taking you. We have had several incidents where a simple car robbery can become a kidnap. So it's important to know how to react to these kind of emergencies too. The duty of care. Organizations have an obligation to protect travelers, and that's why duty of care is handy here. Failure to do so will result in liability and potentially criminal charges and devastating fines for the organization. But at least I mentioned in the webinar last week, this is a two-way venue. It's not only the corporation providing all the elements of this duty of care, it's also the duty of loyalty, the duty of the employees and travelers to behave correctly in order to avoid those risks. The duty of care program needs to have at least these 5 components. The travel policy, that must be informed early and must be accessible to your employees. It introduces risk-based approach to business travelers. For example, what training is required before they travel, the preparations needed before that trip, the behavior that is expected from them, and of course the support that can be provided by the company during that trip, and the post-travel debriefing. Travel tracking is one of the main components that we always recommend for corporations, because this travel tracker provides a risk-based approach to enforcement of the mandatory installation of travel trackers, manual upload of itineraries to travel tracker engines. A vast majority of multinational corporations now capture or have these robust travel programs where they can locate their business travelers at all times. And in case of an incident, they know how to provide support for those travelers. Training. Training is key for all business travelers. It can be like a baseline training provided by the corporations, and from there it's also important to have frequent refreshers of that training. And it can be very specific to the areas where the business travelers will be attending. Regarding pre-travel advice and intelligence, the travelers must have access to security reports that can indicate clearly if they are traveling to medium risk, high risk, or extreme risk destinations. They need to be aware of this as part of the duty of care of the corporation. Having access to detailed and up-to-date intelligence reports through the company's portal is key. Mitigating actions during the trip. Some of the mitigation actions that we recommend during the trip can include, for example, have better drivers or close protection for these executives if they are traveling to high-risk destinations, to have ready support for evacuations, to have satellite phones, tracking devices, to have an operations center that can be reporting daily activities of the travelers, and have immediate notification capabilities to the travelers in case the risk in the country increases or there's a real-time alert of a situation that might be impacting the travelers. In these mitigation actions during a trip, and if it's a country where the company normally sends travelers, it also makes sense to probably have identify safe havens, local or evacuation routes, safe houses, etc. And the last component, response capabilities. If an incident does occur, the company must be able to respond due to this pre-trip planning and existing assets and global networks that must be established before the traveler goes to that destination. Companies normally have emergency or crisis management committees that, based on the level of the incident, they can be called to action. In this graph, it's important to note that before an incident, we have a lot to cover regarding pre-planning and planning for business travelers. But while if an incident materialized, the emergency response is very intensive in resource needs, and it can take a very short time, a period of time, to be able to respond adequately to that emergency. So a corporation needs to have that emergency response in plan and the networking to be able to provide it. After that, of course, it can follow a crisis management at the corporate scale, and from there a business continuity that in a time frame is longer, and this business continuity will include bringing back all the potential victims and the continuous support for those victims. A corporate emergency response plan must be process-driven. And in this case, based on the incident, it needs to be analyzed, evaluated, and it has to follow an escalation phase. So you can have an incident management team on the ground, and from there you can have coordination, emergency coordination at the higher level, and after the emergency leadership team, you can have a corporate crisis team entering into action. It's important to keep all these incident, emergency, and crisis response teams trained, and it's very important to do annual simulation or tabletop exercises to really be prepared in case of an unforeseen emergency. The travel emergency and crisis management plan components are clearly depicted in this graph. So you need to, first of all, organize, as we have mentioned before, get all the people that needs to be involved in that first phase of to organize the pre-travel, and of course the emergency and crisis response plans. Collect all the necessary information regarding the destination, and in case of the emergency and crisis management plans, the most the risk, the highest potential risk that travelers can be facing. Analyze that information, of course, make those travel emergency and crisis plans, execute some of these tabletop exercises, communicate those plans to the travelers, and after that it must be a continuous project in which it needs to be audited and updated as frequently as needed. From a corporate perspective, an emergency response needs to follow a predefined process, and you need to consider all these different stages. The first one, of course, how do you get that intake or that request for help from a female corporate traveler? Who is receiving that first information? What information or advice is given to the person that is in need? How do you deploy the resources, and how fast can you deploy resources to assist in that emergency? What kind of assistance is needed? And of course, there must be also a report process to the corporation to follow up on each and every incident that is taking place. Travel and emergency crisis management is today easier if you use technology and communications. There are several tools in the market, even applications, technologies like GPSs, portable GPSs, or apps that can be downloaded, and of course a very robust software that can be locating your different travelers and crossing information from travel alerts that can be pushed to your travelers in real time. As a traveler, it's also important to send necessarily information and notifications of where are you located, if you have changed anything regarding your traveling itineraries. So your corporation or your emergency response provider can easily be locating you. The last part, what is expected from you as a corporation in order to support those crime victims or emergency response victims. Normally a victim will feel confused, lost. Remember that they are outside of their countries of origin, and there are some language barriers that they might be important to overcome. So you have to be in their mindset as well and know how to support those victims. The victim support needs to consider several steps in order to mitigate that risk. Of course, the first of all is to ensure that that victim can be located in a safe location. We always advise for the travelers to advise their embassies or consulates when they will be traveling to a certain location. And of course, if there's an incident, they should be able to contact that embassy. Having the information on who to contact is key before traveling. If there's a major incident, of course, the corporation is advised to contact a family member and to let them know about what's going on and how you could support, or you will be supporting the business traveler. Sometimes corporations do everything to have a family member going to the destination in case the victim can't travel back to its country of origin. Coordinate all necessary support and services for the victim based on the emergency or the crisis that they are suffering. And also very important to assure these victims' confidentiality. If it's a kidnapping, an assault, a rape, it's key how to handle that sensitive information from a corporate perspective. And be sure as well that the victims continue to have frequent communication to their country of origin, to your corporation, to their family, and that they really don't feel alone while being in this situation outside of their country. And finally, the victim support continues with all the arrangements to have that victim coordinating all the travel or transportation back for that victim. Sometimes this can be very complicated in case of natural disasters. Airports or highways can be closed and victims can be staying several days in those locations. So it's important to continue assessing the situation on the ground and to make the necessary contacts at a local level to provide those transportation arrangements as soon as possible. And of course, the assistance to victims need to consider several factors, not only medical, but psychological, emotional, and you need to establish a plan on how to the returning of that victim to their normal working scenarios when they are back home. The company needs to ensure that care and support continue at all times until they are back. As a conclusion for this webinar, we have identified that threats to business travelers continue to evolve and need to be constantly assessed. It's not a matter of receiving a report once per year. You really need to be looking into intel sources on the ground for your business travelers will be attending. You must have in place that risk management plan that consider all these components and that will be able for the corporation to comply with that duty of care that we discussed. Robust policies and procedures need to be kept, especially for female business travelers. Remember, you can have that policy, a global policy, but there are specific risks related to female travelers that need to be addressed in your policies and in your procedures. Creating these pre-travel, during travel, and post-travel debrief sessions is also very, very important, because your travelers will know where they will be going, what to do during the travel, and of course, if something goes wrong, how to react to that situation. It's establishing continued training programs for female travelers specific to them will definitely be key in these programs at the corporate level. Review your communication protocols, and of course, is your company ready as well to respond in case of a crisis or an emergency? Some companies have very strong pre-planning or planning plans, but they really don't have a robust emergency and response programs. You need to be assessing your providers for this kind of services and continue establishing all the networking at the global level for companies to support you when these scenarios materialize. Well, that's the second part of these women travelers webinar. I am open to some of your questions. Of course, we will be sharing this presentation, and I want to thank you for all your time today. And I will be expecting some of these questions before I close the webinar. Thank you.